It's nothing like Broadway. It's messy and real. There's no sappy string part to say how to feel. I can fall and I can
Hello and welcome to the Nothing Like Broadway podcast. I am writer-composer David Rackoff, the writer-composer of the upcoming off-Broadway musical Nothing Like Broadway. On this podcast, we pick a song from musical theater each week, and then we pick it apart to find out how the song works in the context of the show, how the music works, how the lyrics work, and how they work together to help tell the story of the show. So today we're doing one of my absolute all-time, probably top 5 favorite songs, Meadowlark, and it is from a show called The Baker's Wife that never actually made it to Broadway. And yet this song, Meadowlark, has had an absolute amazing life past that flop of a show. So let me just tell you a little bit about my experience of this song. So this is a song that whenever I'm writing a story song, which is kind of a lot because I like story songs, it's something that I sort of have in the back of my mind as like the platonic ideal of an absolutely amazing story song. It's been very influential on me. Nothing Like Broadway has several songs that are influenced by this song. The title song, Nothing Like Broadway, very much has the structure of history, and then how it relates to the character's modern-day dilemma. The song What If There Were No More Villains from the second act of Nothing Like Broadway is very influenced in this, like sort of the big singing, soaring, and also like storytelling beat by beat by beat. What's so great about Meadowlark is that it's not static. Like it really takes you from one point to another point to another point on a journey throughout the song, and then that journey relates to the place in the story and a decision that the main character is making, which is absolutely what If There Were No More Villains is. And then also a little bit, The World's Most Famous Spy has an influence on this. And then the biggest influence is one of my favorite songs from Nothing Like Broadway was a direct riff on Meadowlark. And it ended up getting cut in our first workshop that we did because I think just nobody got the reference to Meadowlark. Like I think Meadowlark is just not a well-known enough song to have a song in this musical that I wrote that is sort of a jokey reference on that song. And so it didn't go over very well, and we had to cut it after that workshop presentation, and it was such a bummer. And actually, so if you stay tuned all the way to the end of the podcast, I'm going to play the demo of that song in its entirety because it may never get heard again. I wrote a full orchestration for it. I think it's funny, but the audience did not agree, and so therefore, by the ruthless rules of theater, it is cut. So it is not in the show anymore. Anyways, so back to Meadowlark. The story of The Baker's Wife, the musical that Meadowlark comes from, is about a baker in a small town in France who has a young, beautiful bride, and she ends up sort of having a fling with this handsome young Lothario kind of fuckboy. And then the baker stops baking, and so the town is all upset about it. And then she ends up deciding at the end of the show to return to her loving baker husband. And so, you can just sort of tell from that. It's a thin story. Like, there's not a lot going on. There's lots of other, local color with the characters, other people from the town. But basically, it's lady has choice between nice, schlubby baker and hunky, shallow, kind of a jerk Lothario. And so what's she going to choose? And in the end, she chooses the kind baker. So, of course she does, right? That's the main problem of the show, I believe, is that it's just real thin. And so Meadowlark is the end of Act 1 song, and it is a solo by the young woman, Geneviève, and she is sort of working through whether she's going to take this chance on love with this young hunky guy, even though it's going to hurt this sweet, kindly baker. And so throughout the course of the song, she tells the story that she remembers as a child about a meadowlark who this old king came and brought her to his castle, and then she finds this young god who is like, hey, Meadowlark, come with me. And so in the story of the song, the bird, the Meadowlark, decides not to go with the young hunky guy and stays with the king, but ends up dying out of sadness. And so then in the middle of the song, about 2/3 of the way through the song, Genevieve decides to not be like the Meadowlark and to, instead of like withering and dying, to go with the hunky young guy. And so that's what she decides at the end of the song. And that is the end of Act 1, where she is like excited to embark on this adventure with this hunky young guy. And it's a long song. It's like 6.5 minutes, which is a pretty long time for a solo song in a show that's, not, hasn't earned a lot of goodwill from the audience. But it's sort of the idea of the song is it presents it in such a beautiful, dramatic way that instead of being like, her choice being like, hey, do I want to have an affair with this hot guy or stick with the boring, less sexy older guy, it makes it this fairy tale where she's telling the story, and so it makes it exciting and like she's choosing life and vivacity and hope. Like the song is really doing a lot of work to make the obviously incorrect choice that she's making make sense, so that there is some suspense. But there really is no suspense. Like, there really isn't. It's just, that's, I think, the main problem with the show. And in fact, the hunky guy has a solo earlier where he's just showing how he's really into Genevieve, but he's also a womanizer. Like, at the end of the song, he says, I'm in love, I'm in love, I'm in love for the 23rd time, which is, like, kind of funny, but it also just, like, kind of screws the whole show. And they rewrote that line, actually, when the West End finally had a production of it in, like, 1989 or something, where he says, I'm sorry for the guy, but there's nothing I won't try to win the one true love of my whole life, which is obviously, it's not a joke, like the for the 23rd time is, but at least it, isn't like slapping the audience in the face like they're idiots. And so the song is basically, it's mostly in this sort of fairy tale, slightly medieval, triumphant kind of beautiful soaring song, and then toward the end, she then brings it back to her modern sensibility and like how it relates explicitly to her moment of decision right now. The character of Genevieve is very much like a young, sexy, vivacious, modern woman, which also might be part of the reason that the show didn't do well, is because it's a little bit, it really is like putting a young woman's sexuality basically in a place of importance instead of duty and wifeliness and all that. So like there's that too, probably, that is part of the reason that it was hard for audiences to root for her, but I think it just was not a very successful show. So the song is very long, and, whenever you have a show and you have a song that you write that's really long, which is something I do all the time, because I like, you feel like you're telling a story and you've got a beginning, middle, and end, especially on like a really well-crafted song that you've worked really hard on, and in your mind, you've done, it's not like you're just having a lot of like pretty verses. It's like, no, every single word and every single note has a purpose, and I've put a ton of work into this. You can't cut it. You can't cut it down because it's all really important. But that's what, everybody when they write thinks. And so this song apparently was the producer, David Merrick, who's like produced like Hello Dolly and like much bigger, more crowd-pleasing shows. And he was stuck with this turkey sort of touring around the country, and people kept getting fired, and apparently everybody was miserable. And so apparently he just kept on wanting to cut the song, and he just hated it because he thought it just was like too long. He didn't get it. He felt like it slowed the story down, which of course it does. I mean, in that she's making this decision, she could make the decision, like that. Like it's a decision, having this 6.5 minute long monologue. So he would apparently he would even sometimes go into the orchestra and take all the copies of the sheet music from all the different instruments and either rip them up or lock them in a lockbox, depending on who is telling the story. There's a lot of stories about this show out of town. Patty LuPone tells about, they were in, I think in Washington, D.C., in a really big theater, and there were only 25 seats, people in the seats, and they wouldn't all come down to the front, so they're just scattered throughout this 2,000-seat theater, 25 people, which is funny. And there's a famous phrase, if Hitler were alive today, his punishment should be to go out of town with a musical in trouble. And it's an old story, but Patty LuPone tells it in terms of this show. So this song, in a better show with a not as good song, you would absolutely probably cut the song, right? If you had a really good show that was just really firing on all cylinders, and then you had this 6.5 minute long story song where most of it isn't directly, literally about what's happening in the show, you would probably cut it. But in this not very good show with this very good song, I would imagine that the correct answer is to keep that song because it's the best part of the show. So it never came to Broadway, but this song has had a huge life, originally with auditions, with actresses singing this in auditions. And Trevor Nunn, who's a was the Royal Shakespeare Company director. He also directed like Les Mis and Cats and a whole bunch of those shows in the 80s. He kept hearing this song at auditions, and he was like, what is this song, and where did this come from? Like, what's going on? And he ended up mounting the first West End production of it in, I think that's like 89. Oh, sorry, this show was touring around the country in, I think, the late 70s in America, and then it just, closed. But then, like, 12 or 13 years later, Trevor Nunn, this very big and powerful director, decided to mount a full-scale production of it in the West End because of how often he was hearing this song at auditions and how much he liked the song. So the music for this show and the lyrics were written by Stephen Schwartz, who, you may know, he went on to write Wicked. Prior to this, he had written Godspell and Pippin. And this song has a very pop sensibility in like a really good way, which helps make the song go down easy, which, you kind of probably want if you have a 6.5 minute long song, especially in a show that people aren't that into. So having something where the music is just very easy to digest, chord progression wise, is probably really smart. But then, because it is sort of combining this modern poppy sort of sensibility with this old-timey tale of a king and a god and a meadowlark, there's something very fairy tale, sort of medieval, about the way the arrangement is actually written. So even though the chord progression is very, very modern, the actual accompaniment and arrangement and orchestration have this kind of fairy tale, slightly medieval quality to it, which is exciting. It brings us out of this little tiny cloistered world of this little French village where the people are upset because the bread maker is not baking bread because he's depressed because his wife left him. And so all of a sudden now we're in Fantasyland, in like fairy tale world, which is exciting because you kind of want that, I think, at that moment in the show, probably, to just get away from the drudgery of these like French cranky townspeople. And so each chorus, Fly With Me, My Meadowlark, it's like a soaring ride, basically. It's like you're being lifted up by this beautiful melody and like the really big vocals that it invites. And it's exciting. And then coming out of each chorus, there is just one chord that is not part of the key that the song is in. And it's on it basically flats the 7. Sorry, this is probably, but it basically flats the 7, so it takes what would have been a major chord into a minor chord. But it's still a leading tone, which basically is that when you have a note, you don't want to land on that note. It makes you hearing it want to go to the next note. I'll play that part right now so you can hear what that sounds like.
Brocade and cruel, and I love you for life if you will sing for me.
And then you're back into the next verse. So it like leads us basically off of this beautiful, lovely soaring ride with the meadowlark, and then we are led right back into the next part of the story in a slightly sadder way than you might expect. So one of the things about using pop and rock in a musical, and it's something that, if you've been a fan of Broadway, especially for a long time, there's always this sort of push and pull about, like, is Broadway music going to get more modern? Is it not? And one of the big difficulties of using rock and pop in musical theater is that rock and pop tends to be less about character, and it's more about, like, exciting and catchy. And so one of the things that's really hard is the more rock and pop influence you have on a song, usually the less you're able to help it tell the story of the character. So like in Hair, which is a really great show, but like most of those songs could be sung by almost anybody in that show, right? Whereas like when you think of Oklahoma, I Can't Say No, which is a song that we did on the podcast, go back and listen to that episode, that song could only be sung by that one character, Ado Annie, at that one moment. And so that's always sort of a push-pull, and that is one of the achievements of Wicked. Stephen Schwartz, same composer and lyricist from Meadowlark, used pop music in a way that really was storytelling and really was character-y. And so this song, I think, is kind of the precursor to the achievement of Wicked, which is being able to use pop and rock types of songs to really, really help do what musical theater is supposed to be doing with its songs, which is show the character and tell the story. Couple of other technical musical things is this song has a lot of major 9 chords, which is a lot of people argue is the most beautiful chord. And so that is, the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th, the major 7th, and the 9th. I'll play that now. And it sounds even prettier if you arpeggiate it. Right? So that's really pretty, and there's a lot of that going on in this song that just helps to give the whole thing this like beautiful, sort of almost like harp-like ethereal quality to it, while also being a little bit sad and a little bit wistful. And then a couple more things just to talk about, because we've talked about them in the past, is, speaking of past, so the word past which is like the big high note of this song. And it's a high, high, high note, which we'll talk about in a minute. It is a crazy high note. It was one of the earliest crazy high notes in Broadway. So it is the root note of the key that the song is in, and also the fifth of the chord that is currently being played, which is just a very, very, like, that's your prettiest thing. So I'll play that now so you can just hear how awesome that sounds. Right? It's really exciting and pretty. And so musically, it is just an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous song, and yet it's interesting enough to keep our attention, or at least to keep my attention, for 6.5 minutes. And then it ends, instead of ending on the root note, it ends on the fifth degree of the key, which is like this sort of soaring, forward-looking, rather than like bringing it home, because this song is not, it's the end of Act 1, but it's not the end of the show, right? It's like leading you out into intermission. So it's like, it hasn't landed. It is still soaring up in the air. Things are up in the air, like almost literally with the Meadowlark, but also with her decision and how this story is going to play out. So it's just a perfect, beautiful way of ending this song and ending Act 1. And then one more thing that is not something that's done in this song, but something musically that is not done in this song, is there's no key change. Which for a song like this that has repeated beautiful choruses and is really long and was, struggling, the show was struggling, they didn't, or he didn't, resort to a key change, which is really impressive because key changes always kind of sound good. It's always exciting, especially in a big belty song like this. It's so hard to resist always having a key change because you're always like, at some point during the songwriting process, you're like, well, what if I put a key change here? And then you do it, and it always sounds good. Like, it's never going to not sound good to have a half step up key change, especially in a really vocal song. But you really try to use it sparingly because, if you overuse it, it's cheap and it sort of loses its effect. And so there is no key change in this song, which is really impressive. So let's talk about the lyrics for this song, which are bonkers phenomenal. So Stephen Schwartz is, he's a composer and lyricist. He has sometimes worked just as a lyricist. For a while, he had, I think after Baker's Wife, he had a period where he was just writing lyrics for, The Prince of Egypt, the movie, and some other Disney-ish kind of movies. But he is somebody who can be an unbelievable, absolute tippy-top of all-time lyricist. He's somebody who has a sort of uneven level of difficulty. Sometimes he does songs that are incredibly difficult, and he executes them incredibly well. Like Popular from Wicked. Those lyrics are unbelievably good, including, the incredibly clever thing of, popular, lar, were, are. He's using two different pronunciations of the word popular with rhyming it with two different words that both make sense, which is, incredibly hard to do. And he does that more than once in the song with the same pattern. So he's an absolute tippy-top lyricist, but there are also times where he will just write lyrics that are a little more mundane, I guess. Yeah. He's never not good, but sometimes he is aiming for the rafters and achieves the rafters. I don't know how you achieve rafters, but you get what I'm saying. Meadowlark is a song where he is absolutely aiming high and absolutely just nails it. So a couple things, let me start on the basic stuff. So one thing, so this is a pet peeve of mine that you've probably heard me say elsewhere, is using the word fly in a lyric. It's so trite and so cliche normally that it's such a crutch, just fly, you're going to, you and I will fly. It's ugh, don't do that. But in this song, it's totally appropriate because the Meadowlark is literally flying. So it's completely this is the exception that proves the rule. Fly, absolutely, of course you have to use it here. You're talking about a Meadowlark. And also you're talking about metaphorically. There's also a lot of open vowels. This is something that I think lyricists don't think about enough, which is if you have a song that has these big soaring high notes, you really want to put it on an open vowel. You really don't want to be let's just say for this song, instead of fly with me, it was be with me. Be with me, instead of fly away, right? It's open and beautiful, and it just makes this incredibly hard song a little bit easier to sing, or a little more possible to sing, and also just easier on the ears. There's also a technical thing, so we all know about rhyming and your scan pattern, your stress pattern of what words are stressed and how many syllables are in each line, and those are the two sort of big poetic structures that we think of when we think of lyric writing. But there are also some other things that you can do that give your song structure and then make it harder for the lyricist, but also are really good. So here he repeats, but she was blind, the lark was blind, repeating that at every point in each verse. It repeats that, which is how you would tell a story in real life, but also that's kind of hard to do, because that means not every lyric you have is going to make sense to repeat it. So he has to know that going into each verse that, okay, this last line here, this part of the verse, is going to be just repeated verbatim in each place, which is as you would if you were telling this story, which is not an easy thing to do. So having something that like repeats, where it's not like a rhyme, it's just the actual thing repeating, but in the same exact place in each verse, is just a really cool sort of next level of lyric writing difficulty and also just storytelling, character delivery that is a really cool thing to do, not easy to do. He does it here perfectly. All right, and then this is going to get a little bit in the weeds for you lyric nerds, is that this song is written in A-B-A-B for the verses. And what that means is the first line and the third line rhyme with each other, and the second line and the fourth line rhyme with each other, as opposed to the first and second rhyming and then third and fourth rhyming. And what this does is it does a couple things. It makes the rhyming less obvious, like you're not as aware when you're listening to it that this is like rhymey, 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 which is good if you're not in like a patter song. A patter song, you want the audience to be aware of how awesome your rhyming is, but in a story song like this, you don't. You don't want the audience to know that you are rhyming up a storm. And so one thing you can do is just not rhyme that much, which is what a lot of more modern musical theater writers will do. But you can also do A-B-A-B. And what it also does is, in the way that like rhyming, we've talked about in the past, helps to sort of snap your thoughts into a structure that makes it make sense so that it feels right and truthful. Having A-B-A-B where they're interlocking, it's much harder to write, and you get less credit for it from the audience because they're not really even aware that it's rhyming, but it feels right. When you were listening to it, it just feels like, oh, this is a story that makes sense. And especially for like a fairy tale kind of story like this, it feels like this is this well-crafted matrix of truth that you are sharing with the audience. And then also, it makes it really hard to rewrite. So if you decide that you want to change one little thing, you can't just pluck out 2 couplets. You have to just rip up the entire thing. It's like a Sudoku when you get to the end and everything's right except for one thing, and you're like, fuck, that means everything is probably wrong. So that is what the process of rewriting A-B-A-B lyrics are like. It is much more, if one thing isn't working, you've basically got to rip that verse out at the roots and start over. One of the big misconceptions about how lyric writing works is that you come up with a line and then you try to come up with a next line that rhymes with it. That is not how good lyric writing works. Like, that's how crappy lyrics are written, and lyricists, when you hear someone who did that, you can almost always tell, like, oh, he came up with the first line and then just tried to find something that rhymed with it. You can't do that normally just to have good lyrics in any case, but when you're an A-B-A-B, you really, really can't. You really have to sort of get your lists of things and get your ideas and write it in prose, what you're trying to say, and then try to assemble the whole thing together holistically, not from beginning to end of any particular verse. So let me show you an example of the A-B-A-B rhyming. An old king came and took her to his palace, where the walls were burnished bronze and golden braid, and he fed her fruit and nuts from an ivory chalice, and he prayed. So palace and chalice, the first and third line, rhyme. Braid and prayed rhyme. Another cool thing about those 4 words are that they're all spelled differently than the rhyming word. And it's for some reason in your brain, it's more satisfying to hear a perfect rhyme that is spelled differently. P-A-L-A-C-E, chalice is C-H-A-L-I-C-E, and then braid is B-R-A-I-D, prayed is P-R-A-Y-E-D. Something about that makes that whole verse feel really good. It's like a fairy tale. The words are all like burnished bronze, like what a great phrase that is. An ivory chalice, fruit and nuts. Like, there's just so many things about the word choice in this verse that give it an old-timey, majestic, fairy tale kind of feel to it. And then one other thing about lyrics that we haven't talked about before is, in a really, really good lyric, the rhyming words, if you just look at the words at the end of the line, it will tell you something of the story or give you some sort of feel. Like, you want the juiciest, most vavoomy words to be your rhymed words, not the words that are buried in the verse. And like the way that this shows up in less good lyrics, like if it were like a horror, I don't know why I'm going so dark, but if it were like a horror song and like the word was like gouged, like that's a good word to like gouged. You see the word gouged just on its own, you're like, ooh. But what will often happen is they'll be like gouged that day and then something way. And so all of a sudden, if you just look at the list of the rhyming words, it's like day, way, may. Whereas if you have something that is, if you look at this verse that we're just talking about right now, is palace, braid, chalice, prayed. Like, you kind of get what's going on, right? Like, you get the world that you're in. And it's good that these lyrics are so good because this is a long song and it's a complicated song. And in order to justify this song's existence, basically, like the music and the lyrics and the storytelling and just the craftsmanship overall have to be so good. And in fact, they're so good that it's not even like this was a hit song from a popular show. This is a hit song from a show that never made it to Broadway that most people had never heard of, right? That just sort of shows you sometimes quality will win out over all the odds. All right, so now let's talk about the performance of this song. This is where things really kind of get crazy. So this is a showcase for an unbelievably good singer and actor. And if you don't have both, it is just, you can't get through it. It's incredibly hard, but also it's boring to watch. So when Baker's wife was out of town, Carol Demas, who is an excellent singer, I think she was the original Sandy in Grease on Broadway, but she's a really good singer, she got fired because she couldn't kind of sing it. And then Betty Buckley, I swear I remember in concert her telling this story, but I can't find it anywhere online. But apparently she was hired briefly, and she couldn't sing the song. Betty Buckley, like young Betty Buckley, like who has a better voice than Betty Buckley? But she wasn't able to sing it well enough, and so she got fired, and she said that it really stressed her out, and she never sang the song in concert, and she was talking about it with her therapist for like years and years and years, and finally her therapist was like, Betty, just sing the goddamn bird song. Like, get over it. You've got to confront this and sing this song in one of your concerts. And so she started to, and so she sings it now. But so the person who was hired after Carol Demas and Betty Buckley apparently were fired was young Patti LuPone before Evita, a couple years before Evita. And unsurprisingly, she can sing it and she can act it. But it's hard. Like, if you're not 25-year-old Patti LuPone, like, it's a really hard song to sing. And if you look online, there's a million people singing it to varying degrees of success. But also, at the time, having a song like this for this, like, young, sexy woman, but also with these, like, belting, and then at the climax of the song, that high E natural, which is something that people really hadn't been doing. Like, there is something about certain, like, notes, basically, the athleticism of singing certain notes that just didn't really exist before, I mean, like Evita, maybe. I mean, like, you know, like, there are, occasionally you'll have somebody like Melba Moore, you know, who's an actress, but also kind of a pop singer. And then, like, in pop music, you know, Aretha Franklin and people like that. But as far as, like, on Broadway, to be expecting someone to belt out an E was not really reasonable and not really done prior to this song. The stamina required for this song is just unbelievable. And so it's a precursor to, you know, Evita and Wicked and Miss Saigon, where these roles that have the leading character, a woman, having to just act that, be like an unbelievable actress and be able to just belt mix really high and really low and just for a long time. And so it's sort of like how, apparently I've heard, I'm not a sports guy, but like once one person broke the, whatever it is, 10-minute mile, 5-minute mile, I don't know, whatever it was, then other people start to be able to do it because they realize, oh, okay, this is possible. And so I think singing Meadowlark and having Patti LuPone hitting this sustained high E natural was just something that hadn't really been done in a way in like the lead, for the lead character of a show. And it was something that sort of paved the way a little bit. So, you know, Evita, I mean, like literally they got Patti LuPone to sing Evita, and she even was complaining that the singing in Evita was too high and too hard. And I know Elaine Page in London, where Evita premiered, was really having trouble with it. And, you know, Elaine Page is an unbelievable singer, and she was like, I think Andrew Lloyd Webber just like hates women and hates women singers because he's making me sing all these incredibly high notes. You know, maybe, but if you're a fan of this kind of stuff, it's also kind of awesome, and Elaine Page is kind of awesome. And so they ended up, this is a total digression here, but having for Evita, having the main actress play it 6 times a week, having somebody else play it twice a week so that they can rest their voice. Same thing in America with Evita, with Patti LuPone. Wicked does not do that. She does 8 shows a week, but they have a whole process for having one of the, like a standby, swap out in the middle of the show. Like, it's such a demanding role vocally. And again, same person who wrote Wicked as who wrote The Baker's Wife with Meadowlark, is they have a procedure for switching out the witch. Like, if the actress is halfway through Act 1 and is like, you know what, I don't think I got Defying Gravity in me today, they have like a place where they can just like switch out the standby because it's the kind of show, unlike older shows, where if you don't have somebody who is really unbelievably talented at belt mixing and acting and is kind of having a good day, like that's the thing that we sort of forget about is even if you're Patti LuPone or, one of the people who's played Elphaba, if you're having an off day, it's not like a show like Oklahoma where you can kind of get through it and it's fine. If you can't make Defying Gravity, the high notes in that sound amazing. That's kind of half the show is sort of not there. And so this higher level of difficulty, it's almost like new technology. Like women being able to belt mix a high E and also be a fantastic actor. And there's not an infinite amount of those people. A song like this is a song that, musical theater actresses, like I remember in college, before I had ever heard of The Baker's Wife, my musical theater girl belter friends had this song and they were like listening to it over and over again, the original cast with Patti LuPone. And we're like, what is she doing on this high E? Like, how is she belting this note? And they would like rewind it and try it and go to their voice teacher and be like, how is she singing this? And so it is sort of like this new technology of singing that became now sort of standard on Broadway. And, there's some people who complain that everything is being oversung. But if it's, Evita or Elphaba and Wicked, or Kim and Miss Saigon, if somebody isn't belt mixing it extremely, extremely well, it's not the same show. Like, I've seen Evita with somebody who sort of head voices, half-asses the high notes, and it's a bummer. Like, it's not great. And same thing, imagine Defying Gravity if the actress was having an off day, so she's just kind of using her head voice, which is still the same note. Like, it's not like the music demands that it be belted, but the show demands that it be belted. And also, with a song like this, you have to be able to act and hold the audience's attention with just you on stage for almost 7 minutes. And so you'll see today, like if you look at on YouTube on Meadowlark, a lot of people sing it. There's very few who are really, really doing it justice. Like Lindsay Mendez is somebody who comes to mind, who it's just an absolutely amazing version of it. And you watch that, and it sounds amazing. Her acting is amazing. It's thrilling. She's belting all the things she should be belting, but she's not over singing it. It's just gorgeous. But there aren't that many Lindsay Mendez's and Patti LuPone's out there. So there's one more thing. This song, I think I told you before, it's been a huge influence on me as a songwriter. It was so much so specifically that there's one song in Nothing Like Broadway, or that was in Nothing Like Broadway, that is very much a riff on this exact song. And I thought it was really funny. I was really proud of it. I worked really hard. I wrote a full big orchestration for it. And when we did our workshop of it out of town, the audience, it wasn't landing. The audience was just not getting the reference, basically. And the guy who was singing it did great, and he's funny and handsome, and he sounded great. And yet the song was just landing with a thud because I think just nobody got the reference. So the last night of the workshop performances, I was like, okay, buddy, this is the last time this song is probably ever going to be sung in public because it's not you. You're doing great, but it just does not seem to be something that people other than me are finding engaging. So I was like, so just have fun, go out and just sing the hell out of it. And I appreciate everything you've done with the song, but just know that this is the last time this song is probably going to be sung in public. And anyway, I'm going to play this song as like a little bonus at the end of this episode. I'm going to play the entire demo of the song Events Transpired because it's the same situation, basically. The character is trying to convince someone else that instead of being a villain, she should join the good guys and help save the world. And so he's like, oh, I remember this beautiful story song. And the whole show, Nothing Like Broadway, is very self-consciously aware that they're in a musical. And so he's like, okay, I remember this story song that was incredibly influential on me and is exactly appropriate for this situation. I'm going to sing it for you now. And there's a time clock on it, so he's really desperate. But this character is earnest and sweet, but kind of dumb. And so he can't remember what the song is and what the words are. And so he's having to sing this very Meadowlark-inspired song, except he can't remember what the actual story is. So it's like, it's called Events Transpired, like because he can only be incredibly vague because he just has to keep going and trying to tell the story, but he doesn't remember any of the details of it. And so he's like, the moral is lessons were learned. Anyway, so you might not like it either. Feel free to stop listening after the little snippet of Patty singing Meadowlark. But if you would like to listen to the song, feel free to stick around and I will play the song in its entirety because I don't need to worry about copyright because it's my copyright. All right, so this has been the Nothing Like Broadway podcast. If you have a suggestion for a song, or if there's any facts that I got wrong about anything here today, or if you have any suggestions or ways that we can improve the show, please email us nothinglikeBroadway@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at nothinglikeBroadway, and you can look us up on Facebook, Nothing Like Broadway. So we're going to go out listening to who else? Patty the Pone singing a little bit of Meadowlark from The Baker's Wife, written by Stephen Schwartz. And then following that little clip, we are going to have Events Transpired, written by me, cut from Nothing Like Broadway in its entirety. All right, thanks, guys.
The king of the rivers took her to his palace, where the walls were burnished bronze and golden braid, and he fed her fruit and nuts from an ivory chalice, and he prayed, "Sing for me, my meadowlark, sing for me of the silver morning, set me free."
For those of you still here, thank you. I love you. And so this is Events Transpired, cut from Nothing Like Broadway, music and lyrics and orchestration by me, David Rackoff, and sung by the amazingly talented Jason Enzer. Enjoy it for the last time, probably.
Listen to me to get out of this pickle and safe from those who betrayed you. I'm crumpets and tea, you're a hammer and sickle, but please, pray let me persuade you. It needn't take long, all it takes is a song.
Oh, pretty chords.
When I was a child, I heard a lovely ballad. It told a tale in the most poetic prose. The lesson it taught is apropos and valid. The story of that song, let's see, it goes. How's it go? How's it go? How's it go? How's it go?
Just fake it and it'll come.
Events transpired, sentiments were stirred, things were desired, helpful words were heard. I wish I wrote them down.
You're doing great. Keep going.
Events, events, events transpired.
And the moral was?
Outcomes occurred.
This sounds like a very important song.
The more that I lived, it took on greater nuance. The song meant more than way back when I was young. It helped me define my values and my true wants. The words are on the end part of my tongue. What are they? What are they? What are they? What are they? Events transpired. Somebody was spurned. Cannons were fired. Something cool was earned. I can't remember what. Events, events, events transpired. So lessons were learned?
This gives me too much to think about. It isn't fair.
If life isn't fair, then it won't become more fair. With bombs in the air and the air filled with warfare, the fallout will fade, but uranium lingers. Then babies are made with a few extra fingers. If If cows become dead by the dozens and dozens, without any bread we'll start eating our cousins. I'll solve all this mess with persuasive empirics, but only unless I remember the lyrics.
Bring it on home.
This modern day world is turbulent and buzzy.
I know, right?
The screens we use make us blind and dumb and deaf. I wish that my brain, it wasn't so darn fuzzy. I bet that song is relevant AF.
My answer is no.
Please change your mind, because events transpire. Sweat pours off your brow, prospects are dire. When was it, work it out somehow. Events, this song, I'm figuring it out. I've got it, I got it. The song is right now.